Local programming on KRWG Public Media made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. On the program today, we feature a discussion on hemp and marijuana. We will discuss some history, policy, and talk about the science of the plants. Joining us today in studio is Dr. Armando Gonzalez-Stuart, who works on herbal safety at the School of Pharmacy at UTEP, and he also serves as a professor of herbal medicine at El Paso Community College. Dr. Gonzalez-Stuart, thank you so much for joining us in studio to talk about this.
Thank you for having me.
If we could start off maybe talking about a history of marijuana and hemp and the uses of it over the years and even hundreds of years, perhaps.
Yes, certainly. Actually, both of these plants, both hemp and marijuana, have a very interesting history that goes back thousands of years, actually. Both species or subspecies, according to the author, both of these plants have been part of human history for at least, I would say, 6,000 years, if not more.
Wow.
They've been used, the plants are mainly native to Central Asia, and they have been used for food, for medicine, for ceremonial purposes, as well as for, shall I say, recreational use by various groups of people throughout the world.
Mm-hmm. So when did it really become prevalent, the use of marijuana and hemp in the Americas?
Well, the first time that hemp actually was possibly the first subspecies to reach the American continent, probably in Chile, in South America, in the mid-16th century. From then, we must remember that hemp is a non-psychotropic plant, and marijuana is a psychotropic plant. Hemp is a species that is valued because of its fiber and because of its various uses as fuel. So basically, hemp was brought to the Americas again in the 16th century, closely followed by marijuana that was brought in partially by the slave trade from Africa, where it had already been used for a long time. But it's been in the American continent for a long time.
Now, in the United States, or as the United States was forming, what were some of the uses of hemp here in our country, and even before that in this area?
Well, mainly in the U.S., at that time was the British colonies in North America. One of the first places was the colony of Virginia. And we're talking about maybe in the 1600s, early 1600s. And it was mainly for fiber. So because actually hemp makes some of the strongest fiber known, it can be made into clothing. Actually, the sails in which Columbus, the sails of the ships, were made of hemp. Uniforms were made of hemp. Hemp is more resistant to cotton than cotton for many, many things. But even the founding fathers of this country, like Jefferson and Washington and others, were hemp farmers. And they used it mainly for, as I said, fiber production. Okay.
So when was it really when hemp became looked at as a narcotic or an illegal drug, or there was a campaign really against hemp and marijuana?
Well, basically it's because of so much misinformation that has existed. Hemp and marijuana are not the same, and it's not to say that hemp is good and marijuana is bad. Quite simply, that hemp produces, aside from fiber, a compound known as cannabidiol, or CBD, which is now very much in vogue. Okay? And marijuana produces very small amounts of CBD, excuse me, and large amounts, beg your pardon, of THC, which is the psychotropic compound. That being said, there is a difference because hemp really is not used for recreational purposes, but marijuana is. The problem is blurred because if a hemp plant, which is used for fiber and is different in stature, it's different in morphology from marijuana, If it contains more than 0.3% THC, legally it is now considered marijuana. Even though it may be a distinct variety or subspecies, it is now by federal law considered marijuana. But the problem was in 1914, the first ordinance against the use of marijuana, specifically not hemp but marijuana, was happened in El Paso, and by 1915 it was actually outlawed. From that time on, there was a huge smear campaign, which culminated in 1937, which the Marijuana Tax Act. And that basically, what it did was that it made basically impossible for anybody economically or legally to grow marijuana. It was even taken off the United States Pharmacopoeia. Even physicians were jailed or fined in the ensuing years because they were using still medical marijuana.
So was it a common practice for physicians to prescribe marijuana before that really
throughout the American continent, from Canada to Argentina? Many you could get marijuana tinctures both in El Paso or Ciudad Juarez pharmacies. It was perfectly legal. But there was again a smear campaign saying that marijuana was a highly addictive drug, that it caused death, that it caused many, many problems, especially among youth. And of course, it was really unsupported by any data, but there was a very strong, shall I say, lobby against it. And you include newspaper people, you include people who are in the petroleum industry, the pharmaceutical industry. Even though, curiously, the American Medical Association at first was kind of reluctant to be a party to it because they knew that they did have a product that was useful if used judiciously.
Now, you had mentioned El Paso as being a place where this campaign sort of began.
Definitely, yes.
Could you kind of go in depth a little bit about that campaign and
Sure.
what really happened here in the borderland to kind of this sort of hysteria against marijuana that really got folks up in arms?
Well, it was basically more, it had to do a lot with racism as well. Because in 1914, the Mexican Revolution was underway. There was there were a lot of immigrants coming over to the United States, both to escape the revolution as well as they were employed as cheap labor, as always, various industries, in agriculture mostly. And it seems that there was an incident in El Paso, in the city, where a person was killed and they blamed a person of Mexican origin. And they said, the authorities said that this person was under the influence of marijuana, which was not necessarily proven. But in 1915, there was this ordinance that was passed, and from that time on, there was this very, a sense of the United States being invaded by foreigners who were bringing in these drugs that were going to affect, people from the United States. And actually, marijuana was not used recreationally in the United States before at least the 20th century, at least not very much. But again, it just swept through the country, and there was again this campaign with these ridiculous movies and books and pamphlets.
Like Reefer Madness.
Reefer Madness is the prime example of a ludicrous. I mean, by today's standards, if you look at the movie, you'd laugh. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything really bad about marijuana. And if you look at the statistics that, alcohol and tobacco together kill more people directly or indirectly, not only in the United States, but probably around the world, and marijuana really is not at all as dangerous as both of these drugs, which are drugs themselves. But in society, we accept people drinking coffee, and it is a drug, it contains caffeine. People drink cola drinks that contain cola and caffeine, again, stimulants. It's very acceptable. But then again, if somebody smokes marijuana, even though it's medicinal, it may be for medicinal, not recreational purposes, that person is looked upon as a person of I don't know, a second-class citizen or something like that.
Well, obviously the conversation of the legalization of recreational use of marijuana has been in the headlines, especially here in New Mexico, where legislation to enact the legalization of recreational marijuana was stalled in a Senate committee this past legislative session. Let's talk about some facts of marijuana and fiction a little bit.
Sure.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about marijuana that exist today that folks should be aware of?
Well, first of all, marijuana from the recreational point of view, I personally am not very much in favor of. I cannot judge how people behave. That's their issue. But I think that from the medicinal point of view, marijuana and hemp, both of them, are of great value. It's been used in, especially cannabidiol with a small amount of THC, has been used and is being used currently against, very serious epilepsy outbreaks. Epilepsy attacks in children. It's been used for PTSD, both smoked as well as vaped. So if you look at the beneficial aspects of marijuana, they far outweigh the negative ones. That is not to say that marijuana is something that should be advocated as a recreational drug. It can cause dependence in people, especially in young children who are smoking it when they're very young, and they start when they're 13, 14, which is, by the way, the age at which they start smoking tobacco anyway. So it may, if this continues, it may have some serious consequences in the future compared to somebody who starts smoking it maybe at 25 or 30 years of age.
Now, we're used to the phrase gateway drug.
Yes.
At this age.
Actually, if you look at, there was a very important report by the National Academies of Science that came out in 2017 about the use of marijuana. It's a very important report. I think that the most dangerous gateway drug, in my personal opinion right now, is alcohol. Because you see, when people start, drinking alcohol when they're very, very young, okay, that lends itself to other drugs. And of course, the next one will probably be tobacco, and then from then on.
So what you're saying is that when we hear politicians say that marijuana is a gateway drug, is the research backing it up?
Not really, not very much. But again, it depends on how much is being consumed, how it's being consumed. It's not the same when you're consuming, for example, marijuana ingested than when you're smoking it or vaping it. There are different effects on the body. Okay, so again, I'm not saying that marijuana is totally innocuous. It's not. Like anything else, as I just mentioned, tobacco or caffeine or nicotine or anything else, alcohol especially, it really depends on the frequency of use, the quantity of use, and the age in which it begins to be used. So again, it is not something, now the pendulum, of course, is swinging from this prohibition now to let's, everybody use marijuana. That is not entirely correct in my view. We must study more. I think that more than legislation, we need better education of people doing that. Because as I said, if it's used judiciously, both hemp, the CBD, or the CBD plus the THC from marijuana, okay, they far outweigh any negative effects, and it can be very, very useful for people with post-traumatic stress disorder. People, there are studies now, at least in the lab, and animal studies against cancer. There are many things in which both marijuana and hemp can be used together. And right now people tell you that CBD or cannabidiol, because it's not psychotropic, it doesn't cause hallucinations, that's the good one. And the THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, which is more prevalent in marijuana, is the bad one because it does cause a high in certain doses. That is ridiculous because both CBD and THC work together along with many other compounds called terpenes, with something called the entourage effect. They work better synergistically than separately. So those, when used medicinally, I think have a great promise in medicine for both humans as well as animals.
Now, I want to talk a little bit more about why that really is possible. Now, you talk about synergy. With these two things happening and what you just discussed in humans and in animals,
yes.
What are some things that are happening inside our bodies that really make that possible?
Well, that's something very important because not very long ago it was discovered that humans and all vertebrate animals contain something called the endocannabinoid system, which I would call the endocannabinoid network because it exists in almost all parts of the body. And so we actually have receptors in our body. There are at least two, CB1 for cannabinoid 1 and CB2 for cannabinoid 2, that exist in the central nervous system, in the immune system. And these fit like a lock and key to some of these cannabinoids we call the compounds that come from plants, phytocannabinoids. They actually serve a great purpose in maintaining a balance in our bodies and an endocrine system, most of the systems of the body, which is called homeostasis, that maintains balance. And so incredibly, in our bodies, we, aside from endorphins, we also produce these other compounds called endocannabinoids because we produce them. They are not structurally similar to cannabis, to the cannabis phytocannabinoids, but they do have that same, shall we say, effect on the body. And they're mainly anandamide is one and 2-AG is another one. And there may be more in the future, but we do produce them. And as I said, the endocannabinoid system, not only in humans, but in other animals, for example, it's been present basically for hundreds of thousands of years. It's part of coevolution between plants, humans, and animals.
Now, are there some humans and animals that may have specific conditions to where this process may really not be possible?
No, what happens is that, and that's something very important because we influence our endocannabinoid system by our lifestyle. Okay, so somebody who is obese or somebody who has a, shall we say, smokes a lot of tobacco, drinks a lot of alcohol, whatever, they're actually downgrading their endocannabinoid system. So basically, by proper exercise, by good lifestyle, by not consuming, as I said, many of these products, the endocannabinoid system is actually upgraded, and it really works better for you. But again, it's largely an influence of how we live and what we consume.
So I want to kind of move on and talk about some policy that exists today. Obviously, in New Mexico, we have a medical marijuana program
Yes.
in place through the state health department, and we also grow hemp here, just to make sure we know the differences
Yes.
of them for agricultural reasons.
Yes.
We don't have the legal use of recreational marijuana for adults, but we do have a system to where folks can get a card
Yes.
and obtain marijuana. So can we kind of talk about what we have available here for people and kind of the process that people have to go through in order to obtain a license or a card to get that?
Well, New Mexico has been and continues to be a more progressive state compared to other states. Along with California, Colorado, and others, it has had the sensibility in having dispensaries in many parts of the state. I don't know how many exist in New Mexico, but let me tell you that in Texas, the size it is, I think there are only 5 dispensaries for the whole state, which is, in my opinion, very backward. But again, New Mexico right now, if you have a physician's, shall we say, an authorization for a specific problem that you may have, maybe autoimmune disease, it could be cancer, it could be post-traumatic stress disorder, you can go to a dispensary in New Mexico, and then you can get the legal medicinal marijuana for whatever it is that you are ailing from. And it's a far cry from states like Idaho, Nebraska, or others that unfortunately, maybe Kansas, don't have a medical marijuana program like the ones compared to, for example, California, New Mexico, or Colorado, to name just a few.
Now, you mentioned Texas. What exactly exists in Texas that is available for folks who may be interested in finding out more information about a medical program or anything in the sorts?
Well, medicinal cannabis is available in Texas, but again, it has to be through a physician, and you can only, to my knowledge, you can get it through a dispensary. But again, dispensaries are not, in my opinion, this is strictly my opinion, not adequately located within this very vast state. Now, the state of Texas has progressed, talking about hemp, because in June of last year, the Texas legislation approved the farming of and selling and distribution of products that are hemp that contain CBD. Okay, within certain limits, as I said, as long as the hemp products do not contain more than 0.3%, which is very low, of THC, they're illegal in the state of Texas. That was not the case a couple of years ago. There was still a gray area there.
So in Texas, you basically can only obtain CBD at a low THC level. Is that what you're saying?
It has to be, yes, because in order for it to be legal and not marijuana, it has to have less than 0.3% THC.
Wow. Moving forward, do you see this issue being a big topic in the presidential election?
Very much so, because there is a huge groundswell of people that want to use, that need to use and have a right, in my opinion, to use medicinal marijuana. Okay, we're not talking about recreational, we're talking about people who do have health issues. And I think the most progressive candidates are the ones that will favor the legalization of at least medicinal marijuana in all 50 states. Right now, as we speak, if I'm not mistaken, at least 33 of the 50 states have some sort of medicinal marijuana program, and others are changing. Yeah. But I think that in the future, medicinal marijuana should be available in all 50 states. And I think that's going to be the issue right now.
So, I mean, there's a lot of hype around the states that have passed legal use of marijuana for adults in regards to bringing in the revenue,
yes.
the tax revenue from the sales of it, and how it's been able to go back into the schools and drug prevention programs
yes.
or rehab programs. So what are some of the challenges that these states are dealing with right now? Are there any challenges right now that these states are dealing with besides perhaps running out of stock, which we've seen in Nevada?
Yeah, that's happening because of the huge demand. Well, Illinois, for example, is also a progressive state because now physicians are able to prescribe medicinal cannabis instead of opiates. And we know that opiates are, FDA-approved drugs. They are controlled drugs, obviously, as they should be. But they've caused even deaths among many, many people. They've caused addiction. It's an overwhelming problem. And so now some states like Illinois and others are looking at using medicinal marijuana in order to get them off the opiates, which have very, very bad side effects. So I think that, most states right now are looking into some sort of medical programs. As I said, 33 of them at least have them now. But there are some where, again, legislation does not permit any type of use of marijuana, and I think that is wrong. I think that it goes against the health and human rights of certain people. Again, that's my personal opinion. But look at Colorado. A lot of people moved to Colorado. Why? Because in their own home states, they had so many stringent laws that didn't prevent them from getting the treatment they should. And it wasn't, just to get high. It was for some people, children included, that actually needed it to survive. And yes, sir.
So if there is somebody out there who is considering obtaining a license for medicinal purposes, or perhaps they live in a state where it is legal to purchase marijuana for adults, what are some things that people should take to mind in regards to their health before they decide to go down that avenue?
Well, number one, they need to have a physician authorization. If they have that, then they are able to get it in their state, or in states where it is totally legal. There may be, I don't know at this point, issues if the person, for example, brings, we're talking not CBD, we're talking about CBD plus THC, or even a high amount of THC, medical marijuana. If they should travel to a state where they don't have that law, that might have a problem. I don't know. I honestly don't know about that. But it could be an issue in certain states where you come in, you bring in products, you buy them, let's say in Colorado, you go to another state which does not have any medicinal, and you could be infringing the law. I guess maybe, again, that's just my opinion, with your prescription, whatever, it might be not of a problem. But again, there are many issues right now with the movement of certain products within the United States.
Yeah, many of our viewers may have access to CBD just all around them
Sure.
in different stores. So what are some things that they should consider? Because there is perhaps some CBD or marketed that they are CBD products out there that really may not be helping them.
Many of them, many products do not contain CBD, or they may contain more THC than is legal. There are some products they sell you at many stores here in our border area, they tell you, for example, hemp seed oil. And hemp seed oil actually doesn't contain CBD. So it is very nutritious. It's an excellent carrier oil for essential oils, for example, but it contains no CBD, so it does not have that medicinal quality. It is very nutritious, of course, but there are products they tell you that contain CBD, may contain adulterants. They may also contain hemp that was not processed adequately. It may have been sprayed with some sort of pesticides that was not organic. So nowadays there are organizations that are forming throughout the United States in order to have some quality control. But right now, if you just buy CBD at any store, there is a 50-50 chance that what's stated on the label is not what's in the container.
And we just have about a minute left, but what are some things that folks should look at in regards to finding out to make sure they're purchasing the right product for them in regards to perhaps ingredients or
well,
things like that?
Some people may tell you that CBD isolates, the ones that only contain CBD and nothing else, are better. They are not. In my personal opinion, if you have a hemp product that contains the minimum, which is less than 0.3% THC, it would be better for you than just the CBD alone. Aside from the CBD, there are some products that are called broad spectrum, which contain CBD and the terpene compounds, which are necessary. And there are some that are called full spectrum, which are the ones that I recommend, which contain the terpenes, the CBD, and the legal amount of THC. But again, if you are working for a government entity or a place where they test you, you could test positive for marijuana when you're not smoking marijuana or taking marijuana because of the CBD and the small amount of THC.
All right, Dr. Gonzalez-Stuart, I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And educating us on this issue.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And we want to thank you for joining us for Fronteras, Changing America. I'm your host, Anthony Moreno. We'll see you next time.